Fantastic. Gary, can you hear me?
I can indeed.
Hey, welcome virtually to beautiful Montreal. We're
Thank you.
delighted to have you here today. We've had lots of discussion on various topics over the last day and a half, and I think we're going to get really stuck into one of the hottest topics with you, I hope, which is obviously AI and in its newer incarnations. But to sort of summarize, there's been a lot of excitement and concern over AI and particularly generative AI. And I know that you have signed various letters, particularly the form of moratorium letter. I mean, are you an AI pessimist, would you say, Gary? Is that how you would define yourself? Like, where are you in the spectrum? And can you kind of identify some of your concerns?
I would say I am an AI skeptic, that I actually love AI, which not everybody knows about me. I first started working on AI when I was 8 years old with a paper computer. I've built companies around AI. I sold one to Uber. I would really like to see AI work. I'm not a Luddite who's saying we shouldn't do it at all. I think that there's a lot of reason to build AI in terms of scientific and technical advance, in terms of building elder care robots to deal with the demographic inversion that we're facing. There's lots of reasons to build AI. There's some benefits for current AI, including sorry, I'm losing my voice from so many interviews.
Don't worry.
Including making computer programming faster, doing lots of automated writing, maybe not great writing, but sort of work-a-day writing that's fine. But there are also a lot of risks, and especially over the last several months, I've become very worried about misinformation, how these tools might be used to deliberately make misinformation. Also, the fact that they hallucinate a lot, and so can accidentally make misinformation, libel people, defame people. And I'm worried about what cyber criminals might do with all of this stuff, among many other concerns. So I've become very worried that we have no regulation. These things are being rolled out very, very quickly. They're not really reliable, excuse me, or trustworthy. And so this combination of unreliability and kind of corporate irresponsibility and the lack of government infrastructure is enough to keep me fairly worried right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was reading some of your work, and I know that you agreed with Jan LeCun on the point that this could be kind of an off ramp on the road to AGI. But I know you've also talked about, is it MA
I
MA?
dare say that he agreed with me on this one.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry.
For
I should have
five
known
years, I was
better.
saying that, and he was attacking me on Twitter, and then he came around.
Anyway, my
Let's just
mistake.
get to his stuff.
But you've
But go
also
ahead.
talked about MAI, which I think you call mediocre AI. I mean, so I think I would say that probably is more of your concern. And you talked about hallucinations. I mean, is that the main concern, the kind of misinformation piece? Could you unpack a little bit what's going
That,
on there and why you're so concerned about it?
that's the biggest immediate concern. And there's actually two related problems. So one is that bad actors can use the stuff to generate completely fake narratives as much as they want. Like I was at TED, I gave TED talk a couple of days ago, and I gave the example of Galactica, which was a model that Jan LeCun introduced, that said that Elon Musk died in a car crash in 2018. And of
Oh.
course, he didn't really. And you can ask, why did the system do that? And I'll walk you through that in a second. And also, when I was at TED, I gave a narrative where I had a friend who likes to jailbreak these things, make up a narrative about TED and space aliens and how TED Talks were secretly in collusion with space aliens. So you have the deliberate misinformation where someone wants to make up a fake narrative that's going to influence elections. And then you have the accidental misinformation. Another example of that is a law professor was accused of sexual harassment, and it was completely made up, and there was no evidence for it. It claimed that a Washington Post article had said it, but the Washington Post article didn't exist. So let me talk about the second piece of that, the accidental errors that a lot of people are calling hallucinations. And Kate Crawford made up a great term last week, which was hallucitations or I don't know if she says it, but hallucinated citations. And that was what we saw in the particular case with the law professor. Is the thing being said that the law professor had committed sexual harassment. It gave a citation to an actual article, but it didn't understand the article. And the article that it cited was actually not bad, saying that none of this is true. So back to the Elon Musk case. It's a nice one to walk through. Why does the system say that Elon Musk died in a car crash? Well, it says that because there are lots of. Sorry, I'm coughing so much. Give
Don't
me one
worry.
second. too many interviews. So there are lots of other cases in the database of other people dying in car accidents. Elon Musk is involved in Tesla. And from the perspective of these systems, they're just putting together bits of text that are plausible. So it is plausible that these words might go together in a system that doesn't actually understand facts and can't validate what it's saying relative to, say, Wikipedia, or the fact that Elon Musk tweets practically every day. We have lots of evidence he's still alive, but these systems aren't intelligent in the way that you think they are. They can't do the things that human beings do. They're just looking at little statistical signals about different words and how they relate to one another. That's all they're doing. It's very hard for people to really understand what it means to be an autocomplete system rather than a reasoning system.
It's hallucinations like, I mean, you've had to unpack that term, and I heard it for the first time quite recently. I mean, this is just flat out misinformation, like dangerous misinformation, right? Like, do we need a term like hallucinations to describe something that we already have? I don't know whether it helps to have
I
that
mean, there's
term.
some argument about the term, and whether it's fair to human beings that do it. They do just make stuff up. So Bard, when it came out, someone ran a biography of me on it, sent it to me, and it made up 5 lies in 3 sentences. Like, it's a pretty serious problem. It made up the subtitle of my book. It made up quotes that, someone might use this for research, and then they think it's real, and then they post the fake quote in Wikipedia, and these things can start having these echo chamber effects. And these different systems, these different large language models, are training on each other. And so, I mean, I don't know if you want to call it hallucination or something else, but
Mhm.
it's
As long as we
problematic.
know what's happening and the fact it's happening at
Fact
scale.
is, they're not reliable, and we're giving them so much power. Like, people are pouring their lives into them, or their corporate data. It's all getting sucked up. Privacy isn't really being retained, and then it's all getting distorted. Like, we should be worried about that.
Yeah, and to that point, Gary, I know you've been quite outspoken recently about what we should do. We can have moratoriums and we can have debates on Twitter, but I know you have quite strong feelings about what should be done on an international level. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, first I'll say that I signed the pause letter. I understand there are arguments against it. I signed it in part because I just think we need to have attention on the problem. I actually had proposed a pause with Michelle Rempel Garner, who's a member of parliament in Canada, where we proposed not putting a pause on research, but on deployment. And that's another model.
Yeah.
Whatever models one might think of, though, I think the biggest most significant thing right now is that we need global governance for AI. This is what I talked about in TED a few days ago, and then I have an economist op-ed with Anka Royal earlier this week. And what we said is that we don't want a system where we have 193 countries and 193 sets of rules. That's not even good for the companies, right? You think about how expensive these models are. If you have to, train a different model for Luxembourg than you do for the United States, or maybe different for Tennessee than you have to for New York, that's actually expensive. It's damaging to the environment. So it's not really in anybody's interest to have a completely balkanized world with no consensus. That's one issue. Another issue is most places don't have the technical expertise to figure out what to do. We really want this to be a global effort with lots of scientists involved. We want the companies and the governments, we want all the stakeholders to work together and try to find a rational plan here.
I mean, is there an argument that says if you introduce international governance, that you have governance over corporate entities and companies that are developing that are not bad actors, but you don't actually end up regulating the bad actors who will do what they want now that the genie is out of the bottle, so to speak? Like, can an
I
international
mean, we
body?
need penalties for some bad
Yeah.
cases. So, one of the interesting cases that's worth talking about at the summit, in particular, where people have some background, is there's a controversy about whether to make models fully open or not. And there are arguments in both directions. And, I very much support the open source movement in general, but there are risks here. And you might, for example, wonder, do you want people to use large language models that don't have guardrails? And do you want penalties on that? So large language models are now available on the dark web, not just from the companies. And the commercial ones have guardrails. The guardrails aren't perfect, and we could talk about that, but at least they have some. If I were a bad actor, I would just download something from the dark web, not use it with guardrails. Maybe that should be something that we want to universally penalize. We need to raise questions like that.
Yeah, and so jumping back to this idea of the agency and kind of I mean, could you articulate a little bit more about what it looks like? I know you've spoken about kind of civil aviation authorities, and I mean, there are models out there, right? And like, what does it
There are
look
many
like?
models, and I mean, I'm a researcher, I'm not a policymaker.
Fine.
We need a lot of people at the table to sort through those models. And one set of questions is around governance. How much power is there? Are there dues? Who's involved? All those kinds of questions. And I don't, I'm not the right person to answer them, but I'm trying to bring a lot of people to the table. I'll mention Raman Chowdhury is joining me in these efforts, and she's thought a lot about those kinds of questions. So and she will guide me to other people. So it's going to be a lot of people trying to put this together. But the thing that Anka and I emphasized in the Economist thing that I emphasized in my TED talk is that we need both governance and research. And I can sort of speak to that as
Yeah,
my
please
own
do.
background as a researcher. So I'll give you one example is we know misinformation is a problem. We might want new policies around it. So we might, for example, want to decide that the mass production and dissemination of misinformation, like if you post a billion things a day that aren't true, we might want to have penalties for that. But that also means we need new tools even to observe it. Right now, we're flying blind about misinformation. We don't know how much of it there is. We don't know how fast the problem is accelerating. We don't know how much of it is generated by AI. And so we actually need global effort even to build the tools. And that's just one example to deal with all these new risks that are being raised. Another thing we haven't talked about yet today, but is this new thing, auto GPT, where an AI calls another AI, could cause, for example, could be used for cybercrime at very large scale. We need to build new tools for that. So there has to be, I think, a global effort on tools as well as on governance.
I mean, it sounds like a mass effort with lots of different stakeholders. And I don't know if you know, our conference opened with Joshua Benjo, and he talked about motivating the general public to engage with this issue. But I mean, I have to say, right now you're speaking to a room full of AI practitioners, startup founders, people who work within corporates who deal with technology. I mean, what would your ask be, given that I assume you need a groundswell of people advocating for exactly what you're talking about in order to move the needle, right?
We need people. I mean, I want people to reach out to their, congressperson or whatever and say, we really do need AI governance. And I was thinking the other day about these protest marches. What do we want? AI, global AI governance. What? I'll say that again. What do we want? Global AI governance. When do we want it? And I first said now, and then I was talking to Ian Bremmer the other day, and he said, no, 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 we want it 6 months ago. What do we want? Global AI governance. When do we want it? 6 months ago. And everybody should be spreading that message. I think it's urgent. I just don't think that people putting one policy here and one policy there and all this uncoordinated way is really going to work. So we need a groundswell. We need a lot of people to help. We need people with expertise and backgrounds in governance, and we need scientists, and we need a lot of people involved. We're going to announce some kind of international meeting around this. I mean, I have a Twitter space on the 29th with Anka and Rahman and some other people. I'll share the link with you guys. And so we need people involved, and we're going to need some money. We have not yet raised money, but I think we will be able to. But anybody that wants to help, obviously, money is always helpful in lubricating meetings, and we're going to eventually need to hire people and so forth.
Do we need more people with technical backgrounds in government and public offices? Like,
We definitely do, and I think part of the reason to do this globally is instead of every country building a large force of AI experts, of which there aren't that many in the world, if there's some central place where everybody can consult, then maybe there's some efficiencies of scale. But we definitely need people with technical expertise to plot out like what is going to happen next. How do we make agile enough governance that can deal with things? I mean, here's an example: is the EU made this very nice policy, but it had these definitions of 4 levels of AI. And then chatbots came in, and now nobody's even sure where it fits in the 4 levels of AI that people were talking about last year. And maybe more expertise would have helped. But in any case, you need both expertise and a kind of fluid approach to government because things are changing fast.
yeah, I mean, it requires huge change, but hopefully that's possible. Gary, are you okay if I throw out to our audience to see? I've kind of hogged
Sure.
you, but see, does anyone have any questions for Gary that we could put to him? There's someone in the front row here. We have microphone runners. Just bear with me one moment. Just here. I don't know where the person.
That's
Here
Vancouver
we
in
go.
the background, by the way. I'm at TED, and it's my homeland across my adopted homeland across Canada.
Yeah, this.
There's little mountains for you while you get.
There we go. There we go.
Hello, Gary. Thank you very much for the discussion so far. I'm really enjoying it. I'm Nicholas. I'm a 16-year-old high school student. Currently, I'm just looking into, or I'm getting into whole brain emulation and researching ways that we could possibly advance that in a safe way. I had a question about the difference between hallucinations and humans using generated misinformation. From my point of view or my understanding, they seem like different problems that we would need to use different approaches in order to solve. The second part is with systems like AutoGPT, which are capable of doing self-prompting, could these two possibly be combined to cause either more harm, or would they, like, what would be the possibilities of these two kinds of misinformation combined together by one conscious system that's autonomous, or not conscious, but autonomous
Probably
system?
not conscious, but let me see if I can get this both.
Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. The first thing is a solution to these problems fundamentally, in my view, requires neurosymbolic AI. Neural networks have lots of strengths. We're using them a lot, but they're not really good at reasoning over facts. And I think both deliberate misinformation and accidental misinformation require that you can reason over actual facts. You have to be able to, for example, use Wikipedia and other sources as ground truth. And if a system says that Elon Musk died, you want to be able to look that up and see whether it's true. And that's true whether you, for example, maybe annotating misinformation on social media or doing search engines. And so they are different problems, but there is this common notion that systems should be able to reason relative to ground truth. And that's a big unexplored piece of AI. There's a lot of ideas from symbolic AI, but none of them have been built at sufficient scale to really solve the problem. AutoGPT, I think the honest answer is nobody really knows either what the upside is or the downside. When you suddenly expand the scope, I'm very worried about cybersecurity issues. So you have these systems writing code, and they can write code that accesses memory, or it's in pure Python. And the scope of that is probably kind of both brilliant and horrible, is my guess. There can be lots of malware, lots of accidental weird stuff going on. Like, that's really a Pandora's box that we just don't understand yet.
Thank you, Gary. And I think we have another question just in the middle of this row here. Thank you.
Hi. Yeah, thanks, Gary, for talking about this stuff. I work for an AI company, obviously. That's why I'm here. But I think what I've found recently is a real vacuum in an understanding of these systems. I think it's very exciting that there's a chat-enabled interface to be able to, interact with large language models. But I think less people are talking about alignment. And I've actually found myself advising the American Bar Association on their resolution to provide recommendations around, legal issues around AI. And again, their resolution was written before ChatGPT was released, because the principles behind that are, transparency, accountability, and traceability. And I'm just really kind of wondering how we're going to wrap our heads around having a meaningful conversation around regulating a thing that nobody really even understands. I mean, these language models have been found to be creating language models within themselves and in context learning and being able to essentially create a model in a model, like a Russian nesting doll. And that feels like learning. And yet a lot of the regulation that's already out in the EU and the UK, they're based on previous, before language models became a big part of the conversation. How do we think about, in long horizon terms, legislating this kind of technology? I mean, one of the things that I think about is how the pharmaceutical industry, they regulate drugs without understanding how they work. But is there a meaningful relationship between how we could look at, regulation in the AI space And what are your thoughts on this? Because it's really concerning. You know, I'm really I hope people start thinking about alignment, and that becomes the big term that everyone has wrapped their head around. So, yeah.
I think there's like 7 questions in that. I probably won't get to all of them.
Okay, 6 of them is fine.
But they're all good questions. I think one thing is we are accepting a level of non-interpretability and non-transparency right now because we have these tools. When we look back at this era 10 years from now or 5 years from now, it's going to kind of look like we were playing with fire and didn't know what fire extinguishers were, hadn't come up with the idea of having a fire department. These systems are really reckless. They can be great and they can be terrible. On an arithmetic problem, they can be correct and they can be incorrect. If you ask them for medical advice, sometimes it's going to be brilliant and sometimes it's going to be not. And they're entirely or almost entirely uninterpretable, which makes them hard to control. It makes it hard to figure out what's going on. It makes it hard to debug. 5 years from now, people will be like, yeah, that was really cool that they got as far as they did, but there was a much better way to do it. I'm pretty sure that we will get to more tractable systems that we understand better, and that will be a good thing, and we will quickly move from this current set of architectures. But right now, there's the sort of temptation to use them. Governments around the world could say, look, you're failing on privacy, you're failing on interpretability. Come back to us when you have something better. And I don't know if anybody has the will to do that. And there's a whole argument about net benefits and cost and so forth. But I think that question should at least be on the table. Like, maybe you should come up with better tech, or stick to multiple regression. Then you know what's going on, and you can like, maybe I'm being a little extreme there to be provocative, but the point is we shouldn't just accept that it's okay to have models that are completely uninterpretable, and unwieldy in the way that we have, and unreliable. Like, we should think about that. That should be a thoughtful choice. What are the benefits that are being enabled by allowing a kind of lapse from the transparency that people were pushing towards a year or two ago? In terms of alignment, I think that term can mean something short term and something long term. Like, excuse me, there's a fundamental notion of alignment now around just being truthful, being reliable, etc. And we're missing that. And then there's some longer term sense about, like, will the machines, excuse me, attack human beings or things like that. I'm not as worried about those problems right now. We're kind of stuck in the first ones of being truthful and harmless and so forth.
Thank you very much, Gary. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for, but please give a huge hand to the fabulous Gary Marcus. Thanks for joining us, Gary.
Thanks so much for including me at the last minute.
So before we move on to our next fireside chat, I just want to make a very quick call out. You may remember, for those of you who are here this morning, we had some very intelligent youth come onto the stage, the Knowledge Society. At least one of those, Amna Habiba, but I'm sure many of the others are looking for summer internships. So if you work at a company that is able and willing to provide a summer internship for a very smart young person, then please get in touch with Inspired Minds and we'll make sure that we connect you. Anyway, moving